Hi, I'm 72 Daystar, and I'm going to do a commentary on a blog by James Bishop. It's a little bit old, it came out 2 years ago, but it did get reposted today to the fans of the Atheist Experience. Not to be confused with the official Atheist Experience page on Facebook, which sucks. So he makes five of the silliest things that atheists say, and we're going to start with that Jesus never existed. Now, many of you know Richard Carrier is getting a lot of traction in the online atheist community. I don't know how he's doing in the academic community, but I've listened to his points and I'm in no position to refute them. James Bishop gives some quotes from a few people who are much better qualified than I am, but I think he's mining the quote a verse for ones that confirm his position here, even including Bart Ehrman, who compares with a believing with a mythical Jesus is on par with a 6 day creation. Now, I think if pressed, I'm willing to bet if pressed, he might back off that a bit. But especially when you consider something like Ned Ludd. Richard Carrier made this point. Ned Ludd was a person who supposedly started the Luddite movement. So it was a response to industrialization in Europe. And people of his time believed that he really existed. They attributed stories to him. Some people wrote about him. But it turned out that he was a fiction. He was a mythical character who came to be believed to be real. Now, we figured out with historical research later. Now, but this was like the 17th century? Consider 2,000 years. I don't think it's really inconceivable that the same thing could happen. So I really, though I have to admit, I come down on the side of probably was a historical character that got embellished or that did things that convinced ignorant, credulous followers, or had stories that got interpolated later with more fantastic claims. That seems more probable to me. But I couldn't be as, using words like absolute and certain to eliminate the possibility that he could be a myth. So that's the only point. I more or less agree, but I think it deserves that caveat. The second point, that the Bible is not historical. Now, this is kind of related. The Bible is not historical. If I saw an atheist make that claim, I might want to add the caveat that, well, there are some place names that are real, some people that are believed to be real historical figures, and some events that are believed to have happened. But there are also quite a few events that either didn't happen or didn't happen the way it was described in the Bible. This was one of the things where you had devout Christian archaeologists at the beginning of archaeology as a science going back to these places and trying to demonstrate the truth of the Bible and finding out that it wasn't true. The conquering of Canaan did not go down. The archaeological evidence contradicts that. Also, consider the Iliad has some figures that are supposed to be historical. I believe Agamemnon is supposed to be historical. And some of the place names and some of the events. The Trojan War, there was a war between city states in Greece and Troy. Doesn't mean that Mars came down to visit. So, anyways, yeah, I think I have seen some atheists claim that, and they'd be wrong. But the point to be made is it really doesn't help you that there are some historical facts in the Bible. Doesn't really mean that it's help its credibility. I mean, you only really have to be found to be wrong about a few things to compromise your credibility, and that's kind of more important. Next point, number three, that atheists don't have faith. Now, you're using faith in the very general sense, and he tries to equate that to the faith he has. So my faith that the sun will come up tomorrow. He tries to equate with, well, that his faith in God, or maybe his faith in an afterlife or something. I don't know. He doesn't say specifically, My point would be that's not the kind of faith that most atheists are talking about when we talk about faith. We're talking about a faith that is the assured expectations of things hoped for, though not perceived, a la Hebrews 11:1. And the admonition of Jesus in John 20, what is it, 20 and 29, where he's talking to his followers who are testing after he's been risen, after he's risen. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe, making it pious to have faith even though you don't have evidence. That's the kind of faith that we take exception at. And to say the kind of faith that I have, that the sun will come up, that's the faith that everyone has. That's trivially true that atheists have that kind of faith. But the faith that's of concern is the kind of faith that's described in Hebrews and other places in the New Testament. Moving on to point 4. You can't prove that something doesn't exist. You can't prove a negative. Now, this deserves some caveats. Probably you may have seen someone, James Bishop, you may have seen someone who was kind of speaking loosely on this. But when you have something like God that's just not defined, we don't know the breadth or scope of God. We don't know where or when or how he exists. And in those cases, no, we can't prove that God does not exist. We can't prove that negative because God is poorly defined and the scope of our search area. So if I have a bucket and I say, is there water in the bucket? This is the defined area. I can check and see, well, no, there's really no water in the bucket. So yeah, I can prove that there's no water in the bucket. See? Okay. But that's unlike the situation where this is being used. The context typically is a theist asking an atheist for proof that God does not exist. That's typically the context, but he doesn't go there. Number 5, that philosophy is dead. Now, he has at the top of his article a picture of Stephen Hawking, who is famous for saying something, if not those exact words, a fair paraphrase of that. And I think if I'm charitable to Stephen Hawking, I would say he's right. Philosophy is no longer the fountain of new knowledge that it had been in the past. In modern times, science is really the place we go when we want to answer questions like, how did we get here? What is this place? What is this stuff? Excuse me. Could use some water in that bucket right now. But if I'm to be charitable to James Bishop's point, now that I got my voice back, hopefully, I would say, yeah, there are some scientists who don't give enough regard to philosophy, and then when they speak on matters of philosophy, when they do, they make mistakes, and then philosophers and theologians more often are delighted to point out these mistakes. But the same thing happens on the other side, especially since I study psychology, as I know James Bishop does too. And I often find that philosophers who are not knowledgeable about the scientific literature on the nature of consciousness and mind, often only drawing on the philosophical tradition, make similar analogous missteps. Wouldn't it be great if we could just, stop the partisan piss and matches, for lack of a better term, and cooperate? I'm sure philosophers could benefit from more science, and scientists could benefit from more philosophy and a better understanding of it. So that's my contribution and my response to James Bishop's article. Let me get the title right. As I scroll, that's 5 of the silliest things that atheists say. Thanks for watching. 72 Day Star out.